All right, welcome to the Jaunty Mantis. This is a podcast of creative questions for curious gamers. I'm your co-host, Maddie, and joining me is co-host Jesse. Say hello, Jesse.
Hello, Maddie.
Aha, you didn't do it. All right, and speaking of creative questions, Jesse, I have a creative question for you for this episode.
Okay, shoot.
Does fantasy need to get weirder?
Yes. This has been the Jaunty Mantis. Thank you for listening.
Good night, everybody. Send your complaints to Jingoist Fett. No, okay. Do you know what I mean, though, right? Or maybe you don't.
Okay, so we got you've got bog standard fantasy, which is typically vaguely European medieval. Some sliders might be on it. Does it need to be stranger?
Yeah. I think every so often, and I think this has come up many times over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that's kind of one of the advantages of being a 40-something grognard gamer, is that you have had the opportunity to see this come up many times over the course of your gaming careers. People are sick and tired of the Tolkien-esque European, Middle Earth style fantasy. And people ask this question frequently and regularly, should fantasy just be weirder? And I thought this is a difficult question to answer, because with the influx of new gamers, every time we have new popularity coming towards role-playing games, specifically Dungeons and Dragons, it hits the reset button on this question, in my opinion. So okay. Do you know what I mean? So I ask myself this question a lot. I say, can we make this more interesting, right? Without doing the white person thing of, oh, hey, look, culture from a different place in the world that I don't belong to. I'm just going to grab it. And that's my magic system, because that's the state we're at in this culture. Is in general, I think a lot of people are trying to be more respectful of these things that were overlooked in the past. In the past, we had books like Oriental Adventures and other,
I'm trying so hard to not say it.
You know what I mean? We had those books. Those were attempts by the people who made Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games to do something different than Tolkien-esque fantasy, and that's how it turned out.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, because it's not going to be, people are not going to be happy with that. No,
and they shouldn't be.
Yeah. Shugenja. Okay.
Anyway. So what do you think about this overall? Like, are you okay with the status quo, or because you've done more than dip your toe into the OSR,
and that is definitely getting weird and dark and weird and dark and weird. I find those places more compelling. I mean, it's so weird, because if you go back to like what the appendix in, right, from old school D&D, the reference sources for those are actually not Tolkien, and they are weird.
Okay.
We talked, we recorded the episode about magic. We talked about Vancian magic. Like, the Dying Earth is like some weird fantasy there. Like,
example,
real weird. But it seems like mainstream fantasy role play is going to have your same core races, your same sort of villainous, forces in the world. It's not, I mean, like, on an individual country level, there's so much that is like odd in Forgotten Realms, but like, do you really ever experience it in play? It's almost like what you said about the younger generation too, and this is just a collection of impressions and tropes. This is not a well-researched or thought-out opinion. Okay, but
no, if you're doing those, you're on the I need to remind you, you're on the Jaunty Mantis podcast.
I'll just let me just say agency, so you can check that one off your bingo cards. And it seems like there is I would say the popularity is there because it's an easy set of tropes that people can lean into, but the world is there to be the straight man to the player characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I want the world to be more of the I don't know, the guy that you don't know who shows up in your apartment at like 3 in the world to try and sell you something.
Mm-hmm.
That you have no idea how he got in. The house is entirely locked and he's there. He's not the straight man. He's yeah.
Right. Okay. So explain agency then to me. How does that factor into
I just wanted to say it because I've said it like virtually every episode. It has nothing to do with the topic yet. I'm sure I'll get to it.
Oh, okay. Because I have some thoughts on agency. Because in my opinion, it's already getting weird. You just don't know it. From my point of view, and I'm sure a lot of other grognard gamers of a certain age would agree, D&D is weird now. 5th edition is weird now. There's fucking cat people, and like I saw a picture of playing a kobold as a player character, and it was the cutest cartoonified kobold I'd ever seen. I was like, and I don't have a problem with it, but I loved kobolds for being the evil trap making, stab you in the back, just like verminous, like you can knock them over and by winking at them kind of creatures. Like but now they're cute and fun and nuanced as far as they have feelings and a personality. And what is it like to be a kobold? And
have you seen the 3 kobolds in a trench coat?
Yeah. So like that, I think it's already getting weird. It's just a matter of your perspective. I think it is to people who are used to things being a certain way. Like I use weird in quotes because I'm totally okay with it. If you're playing a character like Jonathan from the D&D movie, what are they? There's a Aarakocra. Like Aarakocras go way back for D&D. But now it's just people want to play them. They want to be bird people and cat people, and they want to, use all these different elements. You watch Vox Machina and they are incorporating tieflings and other, Goliaths and all these other things. These are part of the lexicon of fantasy culture that is going even past Dungeons and Dragons. So in my opinion, we're already going weird. We're moving away from Tolkien fantasy, which is the common complaint. I don't know if they have tieflings in Vancian fantasy or whatever it's called. I think you have dragonborns officially now. The half dragon or dragonkin in older editions were sloppy late additions to the rules because they just didn't know how to make them work. Now it's official. Dragonborn are a thing. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think the closest thing to Vancian stuff, though, would be the new races created by the pristine Tower of Athos that are just like weird one-off to like dudes with completely blue skin. That's weirder to me. I don't know. I don't want to be dismissive, but I don't know how to say this without being dismissive. It's just kind of twee, like all the new stuff.
What's
like
twee?
cute, adorable. It's like cozy, sort of comfortable, like knitted sweater, like, oh, I'm just a strange little dude, like, but the world's still, you're there to be like the excitement and color in a world that's playing the straight man, back to my original point.
Right.
Like, I don't know. And I like, again, like nothing wrong with that, but that's not the kind of like walls melt, mushroom trip gone bad weird I think about when I say weird gaming.
I think that's kind of the crux of this conundrum, is that for some of us, weird only goes in a few directions. Like I think when people say, well, fantasy needs to get weirder, and they're thinking of darker, for instance, with the OSR, or they're thinking of some sort of like neo cyber fantasy or sci fantasy aspect to it. Like Numenera is a game that's definitely weird, but it's not weird because it's sci fantasy. It's weird because it's taking all of these really cool ideas and putting them together in a setting that actually works. You know, it's got a lot of thought into it. You know, you're getting like a line right into Monty Cook's head about what this world is supposed to be like. And I think what is weird, like do you define weird as being darker or crazier? Like, or can weird also mean we're taking a more safer, comfortable, more inclusive, more broad approach, painting with different kinds of brushes? Like, orcs are people now. They're not just the evil, ugly things that show up and we kill them, which is how it was when we were kids. Like, orcs showed up, the players killed them. You didn't negotiate with orcs. You didn't try to figure out what their backstory was, or you didn't try to find out if they were running out of water and that's why they had started moving from their, you know, nomadic territories or whatever the case may be. It wasn't a nuanced story when we were kids.
True, but we were also kids, and I would say it's sort of harder for children to tell a nuanced story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think that's weird.
Okay. So
it's
what qualifies weird?
It's I think it's a welcome change of direction. I think people are like doing some serious anti-colonial work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, or trying to through role-playing games, which, you know, after our challenging character discussion, I'm like, yeah, why not do that? Like, that's a challenge. But like, to me, it's not necessarily dark. Because there is OSR stuff that goes real dark and then OSR stuff that doesn't. Like seriously, I would love for you to get a chance to flip through Ultraviolet Grasslands and the Black City.
Okay.
Which is basically like a psychedelic metal prog rock inspired like game and adventure module that every page looks like a Yes album cover or a Uriah Heep, and it's just weird. It's weird science fantasy of taking a caravan like from across the ultraviolet grasslands to the Black City.
Yeah. That sounds fucking awesome, and I would love to do it, but I'm only gonna do a game with that kind of weird if at least 70% of the players want it.
Yeah.
Because here is the other problem with fantasy needs to get weirder is we all have different interpretations of weird. We all have different things we're willing to accept. We all have different boundaries and limits. And I think the reason why the Tolkien-esque or European medieval fantasy starting zone kind of feel to it, as far as, you know, having that's where your campaign is. I think this is a framework that everybody who is going to play this game understands. Like, people understand basically what elves are, even if in the Tolkien books, elves are extremely off-putting. That was one of the things that I didn't like about the Lord of the Rings movies is there were very few moments where you felt like the elves were as off-putting as I remember reading them as in those books, right? Like, elves are these like ancient, mysterious people who are experiencing the world differently than humans, and being around them is fucking weird. And that should be weird enough for you under the context, but elves mean something different now. So I think in that context, like, we're using elves and dwarves and halflings and orcs and castles and swords and dragons and all of these things. That's just the language you need to use to communicate what the setting is. If you go too far in that and your group's not on board with it, your game is not going to work out very well. You're going to spend a lot of time doing what we told you to not do in our episode called World Building with a Light Touch.
True. I guess just to clarify what I'm saying, you're talking about weird characters.
I'm talking about weird anything.
I know, but like, in my view, what you've been describing in the last couple minutes have been weird characters, which I think have always sort of existed.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Like, you're playing characters that are weird and unique and different, like the Goliaths or all the tieflings. Like, those characters are strange. They are unusual.
Yes.
And that strangeness and unusualness is usually a thing that people, I think, play because they feel the same way in the real world, and they want to be strange and unusual maybe in a world where they have a little bit more power and agency.
Mhm.
So it's almost necessary for the world to be less weird for those people to have a positive play experience.
I see what you mean. But if I could play devil's advocate here,
Devil doesn't need an advocate, man.
don't the character classes inform the setting? Don't the character races inform the setting?
Okay. Yes, kind of.
If you're playing a tiefling character, tieflings have to be enough of a thing so that you're not the only tiefling in the world.
Do they?
It's a whole entry in a book.
Yeah, because it's something that's interesting for players. But does that mean there's whole like cities of tieflings? I mean, of course, we know there are in Eberron because Eberron's just great. But
Mm-hmm. The way I understand character classes and races, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but they are the mechanism that helps the players get buy-in into the setting and what it's about and what they're capable of doing in that setting.
Right, but does that mean that every person that picks up the world is a fighter of the character in that character class? Like most of the descriptions in recent editions of Dragonborn is why are they there? Well, they're transplants from another world, and they have a small community in this one little place, and there's not a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's like Forgotten Realms is one. Like if you look at like 13th Age, right? One of the things you do with character creation is you pick your one unique thing, because it's sort of predicated on this idea that your character is really unique. I mean, I forget which game it is, but we've talked about, like, there's a game where it's not like you are a wizard. It's like you are the wizard. I think that's Dungeon World, actually, isn't it? Like,
I mean, in Dungeon World, they specifically state that people shouldn't be playing the same playbook. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like you are unique, and like sort of as a hero or an adventurer, like you are unique and special with your character class. So I don't know. I mean, you could make an argument, and it depends on how you set up your campaign, but I don't think that like the character classes and character races establish the basis of what the normal world is like, because by the nature of what your characters do in most adventure-based fantasy role-playing games, they're special. They're not like just everybody else.
Right. But in some cases, they are extrapolations of the world in the sense of you are playing a unique and special version of something. Like a cleric worships a god, but there are other people in this world that worship that god. And your cleric...
But that god doesn't give those people magic.
That's true, but the magic is provided to the community through the cleric. When a cleric goes into a town, a DM or a GM will often, have followers approach that cleric for religious services. That's a thing that happens in game. Do you see where I'm going with this? Like, you might be the most special version of this thing, but there's still a connection to what the world is. People, you are the representative or warrior of a god. You're a paladin or a cleric of a god. This is a divine force at work in this world, and you are an extension of this divine force, and it has influence over the people. So therefore it informs the players as to what the world is like by applying a very special lens on the character. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if you go too far off the mark with something weird, then, I think you lose the players essentially. And I think this is why anytime a new influx of players to D&D or role-playing games at large presses the reset button on this. And to be fair, I don't know if we're ever going to truly get weird in a mainstream capacity. I think these will just be articles that pop up on BuzzFeed or whatever. Is that still a thing? I don't know. Like,
oh yeah, as a mainstream thing, yeah, I don't think I talk to the mainstream. I don't, like
yeah, but I mean, I think we should be talking to the mainstream on this podcast. I think that's one of the points of what we do here, is that I think this is part of our clever questions, is to inspire people to try something else, to do things differently, to play something else besides Dungeons and Dragons, or at least to do your D&D game differently.
Okay.
So how would you do like a standard 5e D&D game, but make it weird? Like,
I just get Spelljammer and
I think that's a callback. Is that our first callback?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. I'll do it again in 2 episodes, and then we'll hit the rule of 3s, and then, it'll be great.
Yeah, and then the podcast will implode on itself.
Yeah, I think it's setting. I think it's setting stuff, and then you're gonna have to do a lot of the world building with a light touch. Like, you're gonna need to think about why your setting is strange and unusual or alien to expectations. If you want the overall fantasy to be a weird or an odd fantasy.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to do a lot of work to have weird characters. I think players are going to bring that to the table themselves. But one of the things I got to think about this for like setting, again, something coming out of the OSR and what you said, going back to about when people tried to make Oriental adventures, is I think are really blessed to be living in an era where people from those traditionally not represented communities are publishing gaming works. Even reaching into the mainstream, like Journeys to the Radiant Citadel has some really, really cool ideas for ways to have a D&D world, even if it's just like a little setting and one adventure, to have it be different and influenced or painted with a different set of brushes than what people in the Western tradition have been using forever. And that's great, because it's those people are being compensated for their work, as opposed to like having their culture, like,
ripped off,
taking a sword that
and
has no
misused.
hand grip and really only one edge and being like, it's the coolest of all blades. So I would say if you were just doing 5e and you wanted to get into something that's a little bit more different, start with Journeys to the Radiant Citadel, because everything is statted in the game you already know how to play. And it's really well thought out, really well written, and influenced by a wide variety of cultures from around the world. And it's cool.
Yeah. I feel like the easy solution, because okay, so I think the easy solution to, if somebody was like, okay, well, I don't want to do Tolkien fantasy, I don't want to rip off another culture's rich tradition of mythology and history in order to make something which has been the status quo up to this point. I think the easiest way to weird it up is to adjust the way magic works in your world if you're playing a fantasy game, and what those institutions look like. Like like the thing about the D&D fantasy aesthetic being European medieval fantasy is, if you know anything about history, it's completely inaccurate. The world that our characters live in Dungeons and Dragons, like nobody's throwing shit out of the window from a bucket. Yep. There's no toilets in any rooms. Like there's no outhouses. I've never played in a D&D game where somebody was like, oh, everybody is shitting outside in this outhouse. Like, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about when people die, they shit their pants.
They don't show that part on TV.
They don't talk about how everybody has these crude beds that are filled with lice. They don't talk about how the majority of the food for the majority of people is definitely past expiration. They don't talk about how disease has run rampant.
Well, that's grim fantasy.
But see, that's what I'm saying is, like, if you want to add a certain level of weirdness, just take the status quo and start bending it in certain directions. If you bend it far enough, you get grim dark, or you get just grim fantasy, I guess. And so I think if you take the tropes and start like, this was kind of the genius behind Dark Sun, is like Dark Sun was like, well, we have all of these things, but here is the post-apocalyptic sword and sorcery bent on what you understand. So the world of Dark Sun has elves, but in Dark Sun, they're like super tall and they run through the desert.
They're no Kank riders.
Yeah. And the majority of people think that they're like thieves and backstabbers, and nobody trusts them. They have a reputation for being.
Like, doesn't everybody think that about everyone in Dark Sun, though?
Yeah. Yeah. The halflings are cannibals and nobody trusts them, you know? But like, that's a perfect example, is like, find that touchstone or that point that you can use with your group and say, okay, well, this world does have elves and they basically function the way that we understand elves, but this thing happened and they're a little bit different, and this is how they're different.
Yeah, they fight with the bow and the sword.
I know elves is probably a terrible example, because doesn't Forgotten Realms have like 62 different varieties of elves? There's like wood elves and high elves and sun elves and moon elves and star elves, and you know what I mean? So maybe that's a bad example. Can you think of
drow that rule an entire kingdom? And
yeah. Can you think of a D&D style character, species, or race that it was different enough for you to be like, oh, that's an interesting take on that?
Well, I'm going to talk about playing Gia.
Do it.
So with the whole design being like this is a world where it's so new in creation that the planes have not yet separated. Like, that's why it's plain Gia. All of the planes are like in one big supercontinent with dinosaurs. And elves have not yet fully coalesced from the dream. So they're like translucent and literally filled with starlight. Dwarves are partially rock, having recently emerged from the stone of the earth. There's a race called Oozekin, where like an ooze like gets in your nose and takes over you, and now you're kind of bendy and stretchy and have some of the memories of like that person, but you are no longer human. That's weird, man. So yeah, I think those are all ways like yeah, and that all that is to make it weird is like, pick one element at the core of this thing that you think is interesting, and then just turn the slider up to like 100, like on that part of it.
But then people are going to take the normal paths of, you know, well, these elves fly, or these ones live underwater, or these ones are from the moon. You know, like, is that truly being weird, or is it just enough? You know, and the examples that you gave, those people clearly thought this through and came up with some extremely creative, very compelling, very intriguing, I want to play this game kind of examples, right? But if we're being honest, like, this is why these games, this is why these games exist. You know, this is why people play these settings, is because people like, you know, people more creative than me came up with something I want to play in. You know what I mean? I think like the ideal compromise is something like Eberron, where, you know, Keith Baker looked at the way the races were described in the 3rd edition player's handbook and said, let's follow this through to its logical conclusion. You know, the abilities that the gnomes had in 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, like, to him, told the story of a group of people who were very secretive, very private, you know, had illusion magic, and that eventually finds its way into the logical conclusion of the trust, the government of the gnome nation, which is keeping an eye on everything and everyone within it. So I think you don't even have to go to weird lengths to get what you're looking for. Just think it through, like follow it, like evolve the concept. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so then is weird gaming what you're talking just a subversion of standard tropes?
I think that's the best we're going to get as far as what your standard gaming group is going to be able to handle, because I think that's why we haven't made these huge leaps and bounds in getting weirder than Tolkien fantasy. And I wonder if we ever will. I wonder if like this is just basically where we're going to stay, and it's going to be these fringe ideas that, you know, a group of people come up with for a bona fide setting, you know, because you're going to have to skirt that line. If you want to make a weird game, you still have to sell it to people.
Yeah.
You know, this is why so many movies and TV shows like are just like made out of in a almost like in a factory kind of format, is because you have the people who own these movies and they're running a business, and they're like, well, we know that this worked 40 times over here, so let's do it again. And the people who want to be creative and do something new and different are being stifled by it. It's like human beings have this abusive relationship with creativity, in my opinion, and the people who create. You know, it's like, I want something different, but not too different. I want it to be something I recognize so that I can find my place in it and identify with it. So make it weird, but not too weird.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, mainstream big D&D core setting is ever going to be super weird. No, I don't think it's going to be. Because there's not that profitability probably there. But in the indie RPG community, like, you know, in the indie scene, man, I've been saying man a lot tonight. I do not like this new tick I've developed. The weird is very, very much alive. I mean, and I think this might be fun. We won't just do RPGs, because I know that I tend to read a lot more of them than most people. But as far like worlds, fiction, media, let's do a trade, like one for one, what it is, brief description. What would be a source of inspiration in existing media or RPG books that you would go to or recommend to someone looking for weird ideas to infuse the game at their table?
I would say the Dark Crystal would be a very great example of something weird for your game, in the sense that when you watch that movie or that show, there's no actual humans on screen at any time. The Gelflings aren't just like elfin-like or sylvan-like. The fact that they are puppets changes what they can do with them on screen. And so if you look at the shortcuts that they've had to make with like the Skeksis and the Mystics and the story behind them, it's like, if you really are looking for a weird element, redesign your creation myth of your world around these kind of elements.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's like a whole realm. If you can get one of the art books or one of those movies, just like find it at a used bookstore, like some old art book. There was a thing people did in the 70s and 80s. Is just do these weird sort of art books, like the Tolkien bestiary, or like, okay, here's my non-traditional one. Douglas Dixon, The New Dinosaurs.
Yes,
or Man After Man.
That one was, oh man, that dinosaur book was my runner up. I almost said that one first.
Yeah, I have both of those on my shelf. So like, find some weird art book from the 70s or some high concept thing. And
explain that book. Explain the book.
Okay. So The New Dinosaurs is an examination of evolution of what happened in a world where the asteroid or whatever extinction event never happened, and dinosaurs continued to evolve onward over the next 65 million years, for different environments and there's some things in there. There's like Arctic dinosaur, like assuming the weather patterns follow modern Earth and it's not as hot. what do those shifts do? There's like these herd dinosaurs covered in like fur-like feathers that live in the taiga and like the tundra. But then there's one predator, the species that hunts them that looks just like them, and produces a pheromone to be accepted by the pack, and then it strikes them with it. Like, it's just some wild, weird drawing of crazy looking dinosaurs. And then Man After Man is like humanity's nearing an extinction event, and so they start gene engineering people to live in these different extreme biomes, and then the humans that can leave Earth in a colony ship and just leave these things behind, and they evolve over the next millions of years. Like
That's
the
wonderful.
desert people become like a hive species servicing a queen, and there's illustration. It's so weird. Like, yeah. Man After Man, or The New Dinosaurs, Douglas Dixon. Is it Douglas or Dougal?
I thought it was Douglas, but now my copy of this is around here somewhere, because like this book I first encountered as a kid, and it has always been a source of inspiration. And that's what I would say to do for that. And that's kind of what we're doing right now with this 1-for-1, is like find something that appeals to you, that is slightly off-putting and gets your brain juices working. There's actually, I think Monty Cook Games has a book specifically for this. I think it's called The Weird. Thousands and thousands of, no, The Strange is a setting. I think they have an actual book called The Weird. Yes, I'm looking at it right now. It says thousands and thousands of amazing ideas for any game, for every game. And it is creative ideas that people have come up with in order to, help you, create a setting.
I didn't know about that. I'm gonna have to pick that up.
Yeah, I think I've added it to my list of stuff. First, I want to see if the cipher system is for me, which I think it is. But if it's not, then it's not. The other, okay, so what is another like specific reference? I would say, well, my obvious go-to is Farscape. That should be that'll be on the bingo card moving forward for us on the Jaunty Mantis. Farscape was a lot of very interesting ideas of people who were trying to do something different with science fiction. This is back before the idea of a living spaceship was more commonplace or more mainstream. The alien races had specific, like the Luxons, or of course they were the aggressive warrior-like species in the setting, but they often would go into detail about why they were the way they were, why they evolved the way they did. For instance, when a Luxon gets hurt, their blood becomes poisonous, and this is a mechanism to kill predators who are trying to eat them at earlier stages in their development as a species. And so the next conclusion of that is, in episodes of the show, you realize that this entire species of people evolved by putting themselves through extreme pain, because the only way to alleviate or change the toxicity of their blood is to take more hurt. It causes that anatomical physical reaction that changes their blood. So this is the reason why they developed into being that warrior species. It isn't their culture necessarily, it's also in their anatomy. So I would cite that as a great way to find inspiration for taking these time-honored science fiction tropes and then just altering them just enough to make them unique and different and weird. What about you? Got another one?
Going back to just getting specific with the content created by people of color. The project 1,000 Islands it recently ended under some kind of tragic circumstances, but it is a bunch of zines written by people from the Asian community. And each one is like a little island that is just like, I pulled one up to get some reference for it, and it's Merkurgur, the Death Rolled Kingdom, which is just this weird kingdom of alligator gods and blah blah blah.
Nice.
And like, I don't know, the gates. Here's a little sample. I'm just going to read this, give you an idea. There's a line drawing of this thing. The gates. One is black and made of basalt blocks, none smaller than an ox. One is milk white and made of marble columns interlaced, held up by no architectural principle you can see except maybe sorcery. Once this was not a lake, but a city. Once this was a city of black walls, of colonnaded bridges, of market barges and military banners, a border fortress, a gateway to a great kingdom, propelled by a race older than man. And it's just little things like that. There is a great crocodile god who will eat you. I think there is an adventure inside the crocodile in this. Yeah,
Definitely. I think I think this illustrates a very sound point, which is you don't have to do much to get weird. You don't have to imagine a super large scaled thing. You can focus on some really cool ideas and dial in deep on them instead of trying to go, galaxy wide. Either way will work, though.
Here's an item from the list of items from Merkurgur, the Death Rolled Kingdom. Corpse honey. Bees sometimes colonize the dead. This hive zombie stumbles through the forest, a marionette on many wings. Its honey is a miraculous panacea. You must exhaust a hive zombie with groovy music and vigorous dancing. Then it is meek enough to be harvested.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful.
That's weird. That's real weird. I'm not going to read the entry for teak semen, but
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's in there. So yeah, I mean that's a whole set of zines. It's OSR stuff. It's systemless, really. But encounter tables, some weird random stuff. It's just cool.
Right.
Because it's someone taking elements of cultures of, I think, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines primarily, taking those elements, but then putting the fantasy twist on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it just cool. I mean, it's just a cool source of weird that's out there, and they look great on your shelf.
Definitely. I think for my final recommendation, I would recommend a comic book series called Planetary by Warren Ellis and John Cassaday. Warren Ellis is definitely my favorite comic book writer. I don't know anything about him outside of his comic books, and I think he did Castlevania, the animated show on Netflix, and he is the kind of creative thinker that really does a meta approach when it comes to creativity and writing and how people write stories and the kind of science fiction or fantasy stories that get told. And he finds new and interesting ways to explore those ideas. And that's exactly what Planetary is. It's like, it's a love letter to science fiction and comic books while that story is being told, especially like the idea of superheroes and strange events and stuff like that. So it's like a plethora of amazing ideas to get inspired by, and it's an amazing story.
Cool. I'm going to throw out one more. It's actually two, but The Heart and the Spire.
Oh, okay. Sounds familiar.
Rowan Rook and Deckard, Grant Howitt.
That's right. That's why it sounds familiar.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk about it.
It's also got a bee thing in it. But The Heart is a dungeon crawl where like the dungeon is possibly alive, and the deeper you go, the more it's like reality is unstable and it changes you. So only the most strange and desperate of this weird mile-high arcology called the Spire up above go down into the depths. And like, it's just beautiful, weird and wild, strange character classes. Really strange character classes.
That's brilliant.
So check those out.
Awesome. Well, do we have anything else to say about possibly making fantasy weird? I have to preface or can't preface it because we've already all said it, but my kind of PS on everything that we've said is like, I hope fantasy gets really weird. I hope the future of D&D as a mainstream product is just filled with super creative stuff. And I'm not even looking for weird. I'm looking for different. You know, as a straight white man in his 40s, you know, like I just saw the Barbie movie, and I would like people like, oh, what did you think about it? And I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for. And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I've gotten really sick and tired of movies that end with guys playing catch with their dads. Like, I've been watching the same fucking movies my whole life. They've all been made for me as a straight white guy. I want something I can't relate to, that's written from a different perspective, that comes from a different culture, that hasn't gotten the spotlight. Like, I'm not saying this stuff is weird. I'm just looking for different. So I hope we have a future where we have more people of color and female creators and queer creators and whatever we can get that's outside of the straight white guy spectrum, because I think that our hobby desperately needs it.
Yeah. I agree. I'll add in too with just non-binary creators as well.
Definitely.
So we're learning, we're trying.
Yeah, I apologize for the missteps, but we are putting in the effort and we will get there.
Yes. Okay. Should I see if we have any email?
Oh yeah. It's before you do that, let me set it up. Hey everybody, Jaunty Mantis has an email address, jauntymantis@gmail.com. Jesse's going to go ahead and read our very first email. Jesse, go for it.
All right, here we are. This email from a faithful listener, the Google community team, subject line, business tip, get a professional email. Business tip, look more professional with a custom email. Give your business credibility with a professional email, like Jesse at your business, using Google Workspace, plus get an unlimited group email addresses, twice the storage of personal Gmail, 24/7 support, and more. Well, Google community team, thanks for the listen.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate the question. We will talk about getting a more professional website or email in role-playing games next episode.
Oh my gosh, that could be a two-parter.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on for hours about that.
Right. And look, we'll just keep reading the emails as they come to us. So please, listeners, by all means, send in your creative questions for these two curious gamers. It's jauntymantis@gmail.com. Jesse, have you ever heard of social media?
I have. That's that thing, right, where these incredibly powerful computers designed to get your attention are aimed directly at your brain and track everything that you're interested in and then give you more of it. Yeah,
that's exactly it. Are we on it?
We are. We are on the.
Oh, are you okay?
I'm trying to say X, but just pronounce it like it's a word. I don't know.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So are we on the?
Yes,
that's the sound
we are
I heard.
at Jaunty Mantis. Just flip the A and the U like I did when I set up the Twitter account. And we are on Threads at Jaunty Mantis, and we are on Instagram at Jaunty Mantis.
Perfect. And if you have any questions for these two curious gamers, send them on over to there. And until then, we will see you back here next week on the Jaunty Mantis. We won't see you at all because this is an audio format, but you will be able to listen to us for some reason. We have 3 listeners or maybe more. Jesse, what's our catchphrase or what's our sign off? Play some fucking games.
Go play some fucking games and shit. Get weird.
Get weird in your
Let's
games.
Get weird.
Yes, get fucking weird in your games this week, people.